Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here this evening for our Rules of Golf seminar. We're very fortunate to have Mark Wilson here. There's nobody better to have talk about the rules of golf. Mark was the chairman of the PGA of America Rules Committee, also a part of the USGA Rules Committee, and I think actually contributed to the language that we have in the rules of golf right now, which is pretty cool. Think he can recite most of the rules without looking at them, which is pretty cool. So this is meant to be very interactive. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to raise your hands. If there's situations from playing the golf course here at Kent or elsewhere that you've come across and would like to have it addressed for the group, feel free. And with that, I'll pass it off to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Thanks, everybody. Are we okay without the microphone? You're good? Yeah, generally people don't have too much trouble hearing me. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight, and happy spring. This is looking pretty optimistic in spite of the snow that we had this morning, so we're crossing our fingers. In fact, have you been open or not yet? Not yet. Okay, well, it's probably close. As Aaron mentioned, I'm really here to answer your questions. There's a few things that I can discuss to start with. And I was here, time goes by so fast. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I did a program for the members here about the same time of year. So it's nice to come back, and it's also nice to see a lot of familiar faces that I've seen over the years here and in the Grand Rapids area. So again, thank you for coming. But primarily what we want to do is to answer the questions that you have. Maybe it's something that's happened to you on the golf course, something you saw on television that you were puzzled about, or one of those golf rules myths that somebody's kind of put in your head that you're not sure is right. There's always plenty of that goes around. One of the things that I thought I'd start with, just briefly, because we do sometimes have a hard time figuring out who are these various governing bodies that we see. For example, we watch golf on television, and for the most part, week in and week out, we watch events that are conducted by the PGA Tour, headquartered in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, and they run the professional tournaments for the PGA Tour players. But 4 times a year, there are majors, and none of those 4 majors are run by the PGA Tour. The 4 majors, first one coming up obviously in April, the Masters tournament, run by Augusta National Golf Club. So unique in the regard that a country club runs an event that world-class players really from all over the world participate in. And that's a tradition obviously that started in the early 1930s and has continued. So unique in that regard. The PGA Championship in May, going to be this year at Quail Hollow. That's our organization, the PGA of America. So there's 2 PGA members sitting right here. Ward just got up. He's a PGA member as well, as am I. And so that's the Club Professionals organization. And some of you who've been around for a while may recall that at one time the PGA of America ran all of the tour events, and in the late 1960s the tour players kind of split away and formed their own entity that at one point was originally called the Tournament Players Division, and then the PGA Tour. But when that split took place, the PGA of America, the club pros, essentially retained the rights to run 3 fairly major spectator events. The PGA Championship, which as I mentioned is one of the 4 majors, the Senior PGA Championship, which as some of you know, recently in alternating years has been played at Harbor Shores in Benton Harbor, but won't anymore, at least for the foreseeable future, because they're moving on from a sponsorship standpoint. And the other big spectator event that the PGA of America has the rights to run are the Ryder Cup matches. And so again, that's one of the reasons as a PGA professional that I've been able to get involved in officiating, initially at PGA of America championships, and then I started to get invitations to some of the other majors, and I've had a chance to work all the majors. Then the other 2 entities that actually write the rules of golf And so if you've looked at the publications like the Rules of Golf, for example, or maybe some of you, and we can help you with this too, it's really easy. Does anybody have the USGA Rules app on their phone? It's really easy. It's right here. Like, this is what it looks like. There's my USGA Rules app. It's a little red. You got it. Perfect. Okay. So it's right there. And you can just go to the App Store, USGA Rules app. That's what it looks like, unopened. And when you open it, that's right next to my Delta Airlines. Right next to my Delta Airlines app. Right there, USGA Rules of Golf app. And what's nice about it, especially for those of you who are, who like to use your electronics, is that it has the full text of the rules. So you might be in a situation where you're trying to say, well, gee, I want to look this up, and you can open your rules app and you don't need the book. But in any case, so the USGA, the United States Golf Association, jointly writes the rules of golf with an entity that has changed a little bit in the last 15 years or so. But let's talk about the USGA first. USGA, headquartered in Far Hills, New Jersey. They've got a little kind of a southern new headquarters now in Pinehurst. Maybe some of you've been down there and seen the World Golf Hall of Fame. Really nice. USGA's kind of have a second home there in Pinehurst. And when you think of the USGA, in addition to writing rules, you think about what? The United States Open, U.S. Senior Open, United States Amateur Championship, Junior Am, and the conduct of all those championships. And then the final major run by the R&A. And for those of you who maybe have been over to St. Andrews, for really the whole history of golf up until about the last 15 years, the actual rules writing entity on this side, the R&A, was the club itself, the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews, which obviously predates anything here in the United States. And about 15 years ago, mostly for liability reasons, the club sort of backed away and they created an entity called R&A Limited. And R&A Limited now is the rules writing entity and the championship conduct entity that's removed kind of all the club itself from the championships and the writing of the rules. But all the wording in the rules of golf has to be agreed on by these two organizations. So just as a myth, for example, when somebody says to you, well, are you playing by the PGA rules? Well, the PGA doesn't write the rules. I'm actually the PGA of America's representative to this committee, the USGA Rules of Golf Committee. And actually, the current chair of the USGA Rules of Golf Committee is a USGA Executive Committee member, Brian Lewis from South Haven. I don't know if in any of your golf travels, any of you have met Brian from South Haven, Michigan, but he's actually the current chair of the USGA Rules of Golf Committee and a member of the Executive Committee. And before we started today, some of you may know that back in the probably late 70s, you had a member here, Dick Ford, who was also a member of the USGA Executive Committee. So, I remember Mr. Ford very well, but involved in USGA governance, and actually he worked a couple of USGA championships as a rules referee as well. So anyway, there's just a little background in terms of sort of sorting out these various entities that you see or hear about. But when you're dealing with the rules themselves, these are the two organizations that actually 3 times a year will meet jointly to work out the language of making rules changes or whatever they're working on. And some of you may know that pretty significant changes to the rules took place in 2019, and then we had another revision 4 years later for 2023. But quite a big one in 2019, and if any of you have looked at a Rules of Golf book, it's way easier to read and understand than it was prior to 2019, and they're continuing sort of that trend of modernization, simplification, easier to understand, easier language, And also, I think importantly for you golfers, there is a trend toward penalty reductions as well. And some of you may have, heard about some of those things or seen situations that at one time may have involved a penalty and no longer do involve penalties. So that's kind of the continuing trend in terms of what's happening in the rules of golf. And yes, sir.
So it seems that there's a major a month.
There's a major a month.
So I'm questioning whether March, that the players may be a candidate for the next major.
Well, it's interesting when you think about when you think about the kind of the history of how majors evolved. Some of you, not that anybody in the room remembers this, but before there was a Masters tournament that started in 1934, a lot of people regarded the Western Open. If somebody won the Western Open, which obviously had a long history with the Western Golf Association and started in the early 1900s, that was kind of the equivalent of winning a major. And obviously the Open Championship, which started in 1860, is the oldest of what we consider now to be the majors. But for whatever reason, kind of the golf writers and sports writers, I think, have settled on this idea. They like this idea of four for whatever reason, and so that's kind of where it is. Even though, again, for those of us that have watched this, it's hard to believe they just finished playing the 51st Players Championship. It's hard to believe. Some of you remember before when it was played across the street at Sawgrass Country Club. 51st year already for the Players Championship. Where the two governing bodies, again, these two governing bodies are going is they're thinking not just a few years down the road, they're thinking 50 years down the road or more in terms of, I think as all of you know, distance in the game just continues to increase. And many of you know that really the longest players in golf really aren't even at the PGA Tour level. Where are they? They're at the NCAA level. So they just keep getting longer. They're playing college golf. And so I think from that perspective, that's why the rollback. But what I was going to say that really is kind of maybe a little bit under the radar is that currently about 30% of the golf balls that are marketed and players are playing with will conform in 2030. And so there's a little kind of an unknown fact so a lot of what you might be playing with right now will probably still conform. And so in that regard, you really may not notice much of a difference. The other element to it too, because again, we're only talking about how the balls are tested, and how the balls are tested can ultimately be different than how they may perform. And so what clever manufacturers and clever scientists may be able to do is get a ball that conforms to the test, but will actually play not much different than what you're used to now. So those things I think are all possibilities that I wouldn't worry too much about this. I think you'll all be okay. Yes?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by what a rollback is. Are they talking about pulling some balls off the market?
Yeah, so so that term rollback, and that's good. Thank you for asking. So this has kind of been a long, probably over a period of maybe 20 years that especially the USGA has been working on this. Their concern has just been for the increased distance that balls are going, especially at elite levels. It's funny because we can't seem to figure out how to hit it like that, right? But we keep trying, don't we? And I mean, it's astronomical when you really think about it. You watch some of these college players or tour players. So the concern is, from an equipment standpoint, what's realistic in terms of if this continues, and again, that was really the USGA and the RNA's approach. If this continues, what is this going to look like 50 years from now? And so do we have to start now to maybe scale back a little bit. And so, again, I think primarily what will happen at the elite levels, they'll notice a little bit of a difference in the new balls that will be considered conforming starting in 2028. But a lot of us probably won't notice much of a difference because, again, it's really geared more toward those 360-yard drives as opposed to the, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings in here, but however far you currently, and so you don't have to raise your hand if you're at a certain distance level. I don't hit it very far anymore. I got to move up a set of tees. But that's really what it's referring to. And so some people are more worked up about it than others. But that's what Ryan's question was. Yeah, good. What else? Go ahead.
Can you comment on this concept of having the amateur game and the pro game subject to the same rules?
Sure. So the question pertains to, which does make golf unique, is that the amateur game is essentially governed by the same rules as the professional game, and that's been kind of a long-standing tradition of the rules of golf, which does make golf. There's a lot of things when you think about it. There are a lot of things that make golf a unique game. You think about, for example, here's Kent Country Club, and there's 18 holes here, and the 18 holes here are all different than any other holes on any other golf course anywhere. And yet, we're all playing by the same set of rules. So you think about various golf course, hole designs, course designs, and as opposed to, if you have we got the NCAA tournament. Every basketball court is the same dimension, isn't it? And every basketball rim is 10 feet high. And they're all the same. But golf courses are all different. And yet the rules that we all play by, professionals and amateurs, are all the same. And the rules of golf also contemplate various forms of play, which are different than in other sports. Again, in basketball, there's one game. But if you think about it in golf, what is there? There's match play, where you play against an opponent on a hole-by-hole basis, or there's stroke play. This is what we watch on TV almost every week, right? Where an entire field of players plays, usually in the professional case, 4 rounds of golf, and they do something that's pretty hard to do, and that's they hole out on every hole and every round, don't they? I always admire them for that. But for just sort of in the history of the game, there's just been this standard that everybody, no matter who they are, professionals or amateurs, are going to play by the same set of rules. And I think that the governing bodies just feel that that's really important. And really, too, because of the two governing bodies, the USGA's jurisdiction isn't very big. It's the United States, Mexico, and U.S. territories. And the R&A's jurisdiction is the whole rest of the golfing world. So they've got a lot more translation issues in terms of writing the rules and those kinds of things. But for whatever reason in the history of the game, that's just why they've tried to keep the rules the same for both professionals and amateurs.
Does that make any sense with the rollback?
Does it make any sense with the rollback?
It's a pro issue, college golf.
Yeah, as far as distance. Well, again, I think what you'll find is that so everybody's going to be subject to the same golf ball rules, no matter where they play. But I'm not sure that at our level we're going to really, from a technology standpoint, that we're really going to notice it. I really think they're going to overcome all those things, and you'll notice it at the elite levels a little bit, and not as much at our level. I really think they'll work that out. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Go ahead. And then I'll go to the back.
Can you comment on the way the USGA defines amateur as compared to professional, especially with NIL money?
Yeah, without getting into a lot of detail, and if some of you want to look at it, if you go to USGA.org and you're interested in the concept, there are separate rules for amateur status as opposed to the rules of golf. And things have evolved over the years. Players who play in scratch competitions, in other words, not with handicaps can still be an amateur golfer and win up to $1,000 in prize money. NIL money is different for them, just the same way it has been in some of the other sports. They don't necessarily lose their amateur status because they take NIL money. But if you really want to go into detail, I'll put that up, usga.org. If you want to look around usga.org, there's a lot of questions you can get answered, not only about the rules, but things like that. But those have evolved over the years too. I mean, some of you remember a long time ago, well, even not that long ago, you could never win any money, but now in a scratch competition you could. Still in handicap competitions, you're limited to winning $1,000 in merchandise prizes in a handicap competition. Still can't take any cash and stay and remain an amateur golfer. But expenses, travel expenses, team expenses, and the NIL money is all separate in terms of maintaining amateur status. Yes, in the back.
Kind of an abstract question, but for those of us that are high handicappers that understand there's the rules of golf and that's standardized what golf is on, is there any framework that we can use for like daily casual play that still abides by above the rules, but like you land in a divot, you have a ball covered in mud, like I don't need my 18 handicap buddy to try and hit a ball covered in mud. Is there some set of rules that we can rely on that's maybe a little more relaxed but still has a definition? I don't know if that's a fair question.
Well, yeah, it's a fair question. As the kind of the spokesperson for the rules book, it's a little harder for me to say, well, okay. But let's talk about the divot hole question. And this is almost better to take outside because this is one of the most frequently asked. This is one of the most frequently asked questions. And so the two governing bodies, I will say, they're not interested in the divot hole question. But here's fundamentally why. Fundamentally why is that they consider a divot hole to be an irregularity of surface. And by the way, so here's some trivia. The divot hole is the actual gouge in the ground. The piece of turf that flies out is the divot. So there's some trivia for everybody. Maybe you can win a bet. You can win a little. There'll be a couple other things we can talk about tonight where you can win a Coke or even like $5 so that might be the first thing. Know the difference between the divot hole and the divot. But the reason that the governing bodies also aren't interested in it is that first of all, you have to put this in a rules book. So for the USGA, it's not too hard. In English or Spanish for Mexico, RNA, they got to put it in the rule book and translate it into all their languages that they translate it into. So we could all agree, for example, that freshly gouged out divot hole that the ball is in, if we all went outside and looked at one, we could probably all agree. But then we get to the point where maybe that same gouged out one had just been filled with soil pretty recently. So now it's flush with the ground. And maybe at 2 weeks, all you can see is a color difference. And then start to think about, okay, you put that in writing, and for the RNA, translate it into Arab language, into Chinese, Japanese, and explain, okay, at what point does that divot hole, but that's a really good question. I always like the question. At what point would the divot hole no longer be a divot hole? Where would you stop giving relief? But to your other question, sometimes with mud, you even see this with the various tours. They'll play some kind of preferred lies or live clean in place. The tours do that, not necessarily because of mud, sometimes just because of extreme wet conditions. But on the other hand, what the rules writers would say is the divot holes, just a little bit of mud on the ball, those are all kinds of parts of the challenge of the game, that it's an outdoor game. It isn't always played in the perfect weather conditions. Though it's interesting because we've kind of come, and you have to give the superintendents a lot of credit, we've come to expect pretty perfect conditions, haven't we, almost all the time, because of what a nice job all the golf course superintendents have done. And so we expect the bunkers will always be perfect, the fairway lies will always be perfect. you know, the ball in the rough will sit up nicely and so forth. But so that's again kind of the challenge of the game, especially if you go overseas and play. You know, you get in the rough at the Open Championship, and there's some challenges. Yeah, is that good? You okay? All right. Yes. Hi.
Hi, I have a question about match play.
Yeah.
This comes up like every week in Ladies League.
Oh, okay.
So my understanding, so you described stroke play versus match play, and we have some people that think their ball needs to hit the cup in match play, which is like a pace issue amongst handicap issues amongst other things. But I guess my understanding is like it's your strokes plus double bogey, and then if your partner wins the hole, like you can just like pick up or move on. So I guess if you could just like clarify match play rules, that would be helpful.
Well, in match play, the key element in match play is that either two players are playing against each other, and it is based on one hole at a time. So you've got two players who are partners, and they're each playing their own ball, and the lower of the two scores is what counts for the hole. So if it really is match play and you have the other side, so that's called a 4-ball match. That's called a 4-ball match. There's another bet you can win, because most of us misrefer to it as a best ball, don't we? But if you look in the rules book, you'll find it in Rule 23. It's 4-ball match play, and 4-ball, two players play as partners. The lower of the two scores, but between the partners, counts against against the opponents. So if the opponents have holed out in, let's say, the best ball between the two opponents is a 4, and nobody on the other side can do better, then that's when the other side could pick up at the end of the hole, or their strokes could be conceded. And again, that's another element to match play where you can concede a hole to your opponents, or you can concede their next stroke.
For scoring, right? Because I think that's the tension, is like, what do I put down for my score? What do I put down for their score? And like, it creates a lot of confusion.
Well, in the first place, you'd put down what you most likely would have made for the hole if you do pick up, and then you get into those. I don't know if you want to get into this discussion now about stroke control or
It's more like the handicap. Like, what do you post your score?
yeah, where it's based on your handicap, a double bogey, and your handicap.
I personally do think we should do it. Because I'm tired of hearing about it.
So I think
Go ahead, Aaron.
what she's asking is
Somebody will fix out to get a 10. Like, and it takes.
Yeah, and they don't need to.
They don't need
yeah,
exactly.
so the way the handicap system defines it is you're supposed to record the score in which you most likely would have made. And for handicap purposes, when those scores get posted, you had mentioned the strokes plus
I
2.
get that the
Yeah.
right score gets posted. It's a pace issue, and it's like a fun issue. Like, it's like a,
Takes the fun out of it. Yeah.
so it's like,
Go ahead. You're doing good.
yeah, like explaining that in a, I don't know, I guess to me it just feels like you can just post a double and then your scores are gonna net appropriate, or your strokes will net
Yeah, so
appropriate, right?
yeah, theoretically, the number that should be written down on the scorecard would be the score in which you would have most likely made. When it comes to posting the score for handicap purposes later on, at that point in time, if you felt like you would have made a 10 on the hole, but the handicap rules only allow you to post an 8 on that particular hole, would be the player's responsibility to post that 8, or in the case of Ladies League, where the golf shop posts the scores, we enter all the scores in hole by hole, so that the system will pick up if a player made a number on a certain hole that is too high for them to post, and it will automatically adjust it.
I guess I'm asking, how do we communicate that in a more, like, would you say a score you would like to make? Is there a standard, like, double plus my strokes? Is there, I mean, because that's what I've been told, is like, and put that on your card.
That's ESC, equitable stroke.
Yep, and that would be the number that
I mean,
for
obviously,
score.
if you're like, I'm gonna get 5 or whatever you finish on the hole, I guess I'm just asking for like, is there a way we can streamline the communication? Because I feel like it's not, like we've tried and it's just not, people think that they think they're not playing correctly. They think like, I need to count every stroke until the ball hits the hole. And it just creates, you know, I've been out there for 4 hours. Like it's not great.
Yeah, and as far as the not finishing the hole and what do I post, it is kind of open-ended in the way that they describe it, of it being what are you most likely to make. So if you were to be just off of the green in 5 shots, realistically, I'm probably going to hit a chip shot onto the green for my 6th shot, and I'm probably going to 2 putts, so I would record an 8. It's kind of open-ended.
Does that make sense?
Depending on the player's ability, but
I
that
mean, it makes sense to me, yes. And I guess
I guess an associated question might help answer it, and I've seen this in practice too, is like, if you're in charge of your own score, correct? Like, integrity of your own score? Like,
Yeah,
how to score the hole?
in a manner of speaking, but in this concept of if I pick up and I haven't holed out, you still have some responsibility to save. So, for example, if you're 10 feet away and you lie 4 and you can't do any better and the other side has won the hole and you pick up, now remember, you were lying 4 from 10 feet away. So you can't write down an 8, but what you most likely would write down would be a 6. And that's what they mean by most likely would have made. Yep.
That's your right to do because you're getting your own card, right?
Yeah, and that's what you most likely.
Issue with how you approach that. That happens around the club. Yeah.
Yeah, what it really matters for now is just for posting for handicaps. That's what really matters. But Aaron's explanation is a good one, but it is hard to convey that sometimes. And sometimes you really are at a point where you've taken so many strokes that you really have reached the limit, and you pick up there and record what essentially for this equitable stroke control purpose, the most strokes you could possibly take, and move on. So, but it is hard to explain.
Hey, Aaron, what's the max you can record for handicap purposes? No matter, is it carrying based on your handicap?
It does.
For all figures?
It does. It changed a number of years ago. It used to be a set number. Now it's based on handicap. So if you're playing hole number 1 out here at Kent, being a par 4, and your handicap gives you a stroke on that hole, the most you can post for handicap purposes is a net double bogey. So if you had one stroke on hole number 1, one handicap stroke on hole number 1, the most you can post for handicap purposes would be a 7.
So net double bogey is no matter what your
Correct, no matter what.
So that could be a good framework. I guess what I'm saying is like that could be a good framework for people because I think the ambiguity is really hard. But if you said, hey, like if you surpass net double bogey and the other team won the hole, like it's okay. Like just like if you want to finish the hole, like I support that. Like I get it. Some people want to finish the hole, and if you're gonna get a par and you want to finish the hole, do your thing. But if you surpass that double bogey and you're insistent that like you need to make that 12 putt, like that's kind of, I guess that's what I'm asking, which is like a framework of like maybe even printing that on scorecards or something to help. What, like I think it's intuitive, but maybe I think it's intuitive, but in practice it doesn't seem to be intuitive.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Ball's on the putting green, and you're going up to your ball, and you drop your club on the ball, and it causes it to move. There's no penalty. You just have to put the ball back. Or let's say you're reaching down to mark it, and you drop the coin, and the coin causes the ball to move. You know, prior to 2019, there was a 1-stroke penalty, and you had to replace the ball. You still have to replace the ball, but there's no penalty. The other thing, and a lot of you are familiar with this since 2019, when you're on the putting green, once you have marked, lifted, and then replaced your ball, Once it's replaced, if it blows somewhere or moves somewhere else, you've got to put it back to where it was, and that wasn't the case prior to 2019. Most people have gotten used to that, and for the most part, it works to players' advantages. It doesn't always, but it tends to be more fair. Prior to 2019, we had some of those situations where players would have marked their ball on the putting green, lifted it, and then replaced it. And because putting greens are cut short and sometimes it's windy, balls would blow certain places and they might blow off the putting green, for example. Those tended to seem kind of unfair. And so instead, we've replaced that with this concept of on the putting green, we've essentially eliminated accidental movement penalties and this concept of once the ball's been marked, lifted, and replaced, it's basically going to occupy that position until you play another stroke. So I think those would be things that, have brought a little more fairness to the game and reduced penalties. Other things, again, for those of you who've been around and played the game for a while, you've seen evolution. Just for example, player will play a stroke, ball might ricochet off the tree and hit the player. Prior to 2008, that was a two-stroke penalty. And some of you remember 2003, it didn't seem very fair, did it? You didn't mean for that to happen. It was an accidental deflection. Some of you remember that 2003 Masters on Sunday. Jeff Maggard had that happen on the third hole. Played that stroke, the ball hit the bank of the bunker and came back and hit him in the chest. And at that time, it was a two-stroke penalty. The rules of golf committees talked about it. They thought, well, that didn't seem very fair, so they changed it to a one-stroke penalty. And then those accidental deflections in 2019 really have all gone into the basket, basically, of no penalty. So those are some of the things so now if you had that situation happen where you played a stroke, hit a tree, and now it comes back and it hits you, or it hits your golf bag, or hits your golf car, there's no penalty. It's an accidental deflection. You didn't mean for it to happen, and so no penalty. Just play the ball from wherever it ends up after the accidental deflection. But for mistakes, I can't think particularly of mistakes that players make because of the 2019 changes. Mostly I can only think that it's kind of gotten better for players who may have made some of those mistakes prior to 2019. Go ahead, Chris.
Say I chip up on the green and I don't mark my ball, I leave it because I think it's fine.
Yeah.
And whoever I'm playing with chips up on the green. They hit my ball and move it close to the hole. Whose fault is it? I have to mark my ball or do can I move the ball where it hit it and move it forward? Do I move my ball back to where it was?
Okay, good. Well, first of all, let's, they gave me all this nice drawing equipment, so let's just look at this. Let's look at this. So here's Chris's ball on the putting green. And so let me just say this first, that, if you're in a situation where maybe your ball might interfere or help somebody that's next to chip, that, maybe you want to go up and mark the position of your ball because it, for two reasons. It might be actually an advantage to somebody for you to leave the ball there, and you don't really want to give them an advantage. Or it might be a disadvantage, and so kind of as a courtesy, you could mark it and get it out of the way. But if that doesn't happen, this is another one of these accidental deflections. So in her scenario, the other player has played from here and now played up and has basically this ball in motion has deflected and moved this ball that was at rest. So one common element to this rule for that ball that's at rest, your ball is always going to be replaced. It's been moved by another ball that was in motion. Your ball always goes back to where it was. You don't get to take advantage of the fact that it moved closer, or you're not disadvantaged by the fact that it moved farther away. You're No, there's no penalty. The only time there's a penalty involved in balls that collide with each other would be in stroke play, and that would be if both balls were on the putting green prior to the stroke. The player who plays a stroke from the putting green and their ball in motion is deflected or stopped by a ball that's at rest, that player who was putting would be penalized in stroke play, 2 strokes. Your ball that was at rest, there's no penalty, but again, your ball at rest is always going to be replaced in the case where it's moved by a ball in motion. And that's, it's a good question because it happens, it doesn't happen really commonly, but when it happens, same way, everybody, out in the fairway, you hit your tee shot, nice tee shot down the middle of the fairway, and the next player in the group plays their tee shot. Again, it doesn't happen very often. Their ball rolls down and bang, what do you know? It collides and causes your ball that was at rest to move. And everybody kind of gasps because they don't know what to do. Well, remember, right, there's always that gasp. So, but see, now you're going to be able to explain it because you came tonight, so you're going to be able to explain it. So that ball of yours that was at rest, even in the fairway, you're going to put it back where it was. And that ball that was moving is just going to end up being played from wherever it ends up, wherever it's deflected to. But again, there's a common element to that. Your ball was in play and it was at rest in the fairway on the putting green, and it got moved by another ball in motion, and your ball that was at rest is always going to be replaced. The ball in motion is going to be played wherever it ends up.
How would be a turkey out there?
A turkey. I know you've got some turkeys here, don't you? The turkeys moved in here, about 20 years ago or so, and they're here to stay, I guess, huh? Well, a turkey is what's considered, a turkey is actually considered an outside influence. And so there's a status. Turkeys have a status. We don't want to leave those turkeys out. And so if you play a stroke and your ball deflects off a turkey, that's an outside influence. And the ball's just played as it lies with one exception. And that would be if you were playing a stroke from the putting green. So now you're putting and your ball in motion is deflected by a turkey. Let's say the turkey's walking across the green. They're pretty tame too, I know. So it's deflected by the turkey that's walking across the putting green. That stroke would not count. It would be canceled. And you'd have to play again from where you played the previous stroke from the putting green. So that's only if it happened on the putting green. Because the rules kind of contemplate, well, a stroke from the putting green, mostly should not get interfered with by turkeys. On other parts of the course, not so much. Your ball deflected by a turkey. Let's say your tee shot lands in the fairway and hits a turkey. Well, wherever the ball ends up, that's where you're going to have to play it from. So putting green would be the exception. You hit a turkey when you play a stroke for the putting green, no penalty, but cancel that stroke, put the ball back where it was, and you won't know exactly where because you've lifted your coin. Just estimate that spot, put your ball back on the putting green about where it was, and go ahead and putt again. Okay? It's good. Turkey question. Hi, yes.
I had a question. So, if you are like a tee shot or whatever shot, and you don't go out of bounds, but either you're like into a hazard or like tons of leaps or whatnot, and so you are looking for it with your partners and whatnot, and like kicking around or using your club, and the ball gets moved.
Oh, good.
Can you move it back to where it was and not take a penalty? Or
Okay.
you have to,
No, keep going. It's a great question.
I thought maybe you can technically move it back to where you think it was and not take a penalty.
Okay, did everybody hear the question? Could you hear it back there? So it's a good question because it's a 2019 change and it deals with searching for your ball. And again, for some of you who were around prior to 2019, you might recall that prior to 2019, the one player who had the most interest in finding their ball, that was the player themselves, was really kind of the most constrained in the search. Because if a whole group was searching and the player, him or herself, moved their own ball while they were searching, well, they got a penalty. And yet, so in some of the discussion for the changes for 2019, and I know, see, some of you think that these rules writers are always just tough guys and they don't care about players. But you're starting to think, well, look, what does the game contemplate? Well, it contemplates you're going to play a tee shot, and it contemplates you're going to go down and find your ball and play again, right? You can't continue if you can't find your ball and you can't play. And so for 2019, what they said is, well, look, why should the player who we expect to find the ball and play again, why should they be so disadvantaged? So now, a couple of things about search. Whatever's reasonable in the circumstances. So let's say in the leaves, I could use my feet or I could use a club to sort of part the leaves. And if the ball's accidentally moved during the search, there's no penalty to anyone, even if the player themselves causes the ball to move during the search. But the one thing that you mentioned, you must replace the ball where it was when you moved it. So again, just like Chris's question, you can't take advantage of moving it to your advantage or disadvantage. When you're searching and you cause it to move, now you've got to basically pick it up and put it back. Now, some of you remember before 2019, if you didn't know the spot, you'd drop it. Well, that isn't true anymore. In this case, when you've been searching and it had a spot, you're going to place it. And it gets back in the long grass, at the bottom of the long grass. You're not going to say, well, look, I'll put it way up. I'm going to put it right up on top here. Now, you don't have to put the leaves back. The leaves are loose impediments, so if you've moved some loose impediments, they're not considered part of the lie. But I'll get yours right next. But no penalty, but you must replace the ball. So, yeah, that was excellent. And that would be true. That would be true in really any area of the course. So that would be true in the general area, meaning the fairway or the rough. It'd be true in a penalty area, those areas that are marked with red or yellow lines, which you don't have any of here. Oh, you do on 2, left of 2. Red penalty area, left of 2. But again, the search, same liberal provisions for search, including, everybody, in a bunker. If your ball is buried, completely buried in a bunker, and you don't know where it is, you can move the sand with your hands, with a club, with a rake. See, and we grew up thinking about all these things that we were not permitted to do in a bunker. But on the other hand, there's things, if you dig deep into the rules, there's things that you are permitted to do in a bunker. And so if our ball was completely buried in sand in the bunker, we could move the sand. When we find the ball, again, if we've caused it to move, just put it back where it was, cover it up, and then just leave a little part of the ball visible. Okay, there was one in the back, and then we'll go to flip. Yes.
Related to that example you just gave, whose decision is it, whose final decision is it of what the lie was with the ball found? Let's say you're sweeping through the leaves, deep grass, and you find it. I place it where I think it was my ball. My competitor says, no, that ball was buried when you found it. Whose call is that?
Well, that's why you need to call Aaron then. So, but really, in an officiating situation like that, let's say there was a question. Well, we're going to just consider the facts, and in some cases you'd say, well, okay, who was closest to where the ball was? Who's really in the best position to know what the nature of the lie was? Most of the time it's the player. And remember, if you look in Rule 1, one of the key things in Rule 1 in the rules of golf is the rules, again, this is what makes golf kind of unique. The rules presume players play with integrity. And players do what? Golf's unique because players enforce penalties on themselves, right? And as you and I talked about earlier, they keep their own score also, and they're responsible for all those things, which does, again, make the game unique from all those perspectives. If there's a dispute, you'd bring in a referee or a member of the committee, and they'd do their best to kind of consider the evidence and make a decision. But hopefully, if players play with integrity, The fundamental element is to it that the player needs to get the ball back as near as possible to where it was and consider the nature of the lie. They can't take advantage by getting it up on top when it clearly wasn't there. Okay, flip. Yeah.
The first one is that debate on the rakes being inside the trap or outside.
Okay.
But if people end up putting it inside the trap and your ball comes to rest on the rake, and you obviously can't hit that. Actually, you
Just a rake.
shot, but so if you lift up the rake and the ball rolls down to the middle of the trap where it's supposed to, you have to place it back.
That's another one of those, you know, wherever the rake is, when that rake gets moved and the ball moves, that's another one of those where everybody gasps, don't they? Oh, right? So what do you do with rakes here? Are you in or out with your rakes here? They're in the bunkers or out? Where? Huh? What? Is there does Kent have a does okay. I'm just asking Aaron, because every facility does it a little bit differently. Every facility does it differently. So I'll defer to whatever they do here.
At the beginning of the day, the rakes are in the bunker.
Okay.
Is that for mowing?
Not always the case as the day goes along.
Where do you want us to put this in the bunker? Right? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go back to the question here. Here's the rake. There's the rake. And here's the ball resting against the rake. Now, this could be a rake that's outside the bunker, or it could be a rake that's inside the bunker, but there's basically one common theme here. See, we're going to have common themes to this. If I move the rake handle and the ball accidentally moves, this rake is a movable obstruction under the rules, and I'm entitled to move the rake whether my ball is in the bunker or not. I'm entitled to move the rake, and when I move the rake, if the ball moves, what's the common theme, everybody? What do I have to do with the ball? I got to put it back, don't I? I've got to put it back. Now, sometimes it's not possible to put it back because the slope that it's on is so steep that it won't stay. And so then what the player needs to do, and you've seen this on TV, you've seen players get rulings where their ball at rest has moved, and so what are they required to do? Well, they're required to replace it, and then all of a sudden it rolls again. And so then they're required to put it back one more time. And if it doesn't stay there, then, and again, you've all seen this on TV, because, right, the rules referee is pointing with that walkie-talkie antenna, right? They're pointing. And just so, here's a secret. They don't actually talk on those things. They just use them as pointers. They're really a decoy. That's all we use them for, is pointers. But, so then what the player's going to try to do is find a place as near as possible to where this ball was, where the ball will stay at rest, but you can't go closer to the hole in finding that place. And for example, if this is inside of a bunker, we also can't go out of the bunker to find a place where the ball will stay at rest. So this can get a little bit tricky. In cases where we've got, let's say our putting green is here and our bunker is like this, and the ball is near the back of the bunker, and here's the bunker rake, and there's a steep slope now that goes this way. And so maybe our ball was on this side of the rake, and we move the rake and the ball rolls down. Well, now we are sort of challenged to find a place where we can place this ball at rest that will be no closer to the hole. But that's what we have to do. And if we're not able to do it, then we've got to take a penalty to go under the unplayable ball rule. And so this is the one real hard one where you are near the back of a bunker and the ball comes to rest against the rake, and then it won't stay when you try to put it back. Yes, sir.
Okay, take the penalty. Where's the ball going?
Okay, so now when the ball's unplayable in a bunker, there's 4 things that the player can do. But we're going to find here that none of these are really super good options. And again, this is why, but it still allows the player to keep playing. So they're not completely shut off here. So here are the options. The first is for 1 penalty stroke, and to stay in the bunker, the player can measure 2 club lengths either this way or this way. Well, you can see we don't have very much room, and they can take what you call lateral relief to the side within 2 club lengths and go ahead and drop from knee height. The next option that would be available is called what they call back on the line relief. And again, there isn't very much of it here. And I'll draw another picture after this one. We'll specifically answer this bunker question. Then we can go to the unplayable ball rule, and we can show you what you might normally have. Back on the line would be I'd keep the original position of the ball and the flagstick in a line and go back, but I'd have to stay in the bunker for 1 penalty stroke. Well, there's not very much room there either for 1 penalty stroke. Also for 1 penalty stroke, hoping that my previous stroke was played from outside of the bunker. Let's say my previous stroke was played from back here in the fairway. I could go back under stroke and distance, just the same way I could as if I had a lost ball or it was out of bounds. So for 1 penalty stroke, let's say I hit my second shot into the bunker. So for 1 penalty stroke, that's 3. Playing 4, I could go back here to the spot of the previous stroke. So let's say it was from the middle of the fairway. And now since 2019, it's not just the spot. Remember, I've got this kind of half circle relief area. Club length, club to the left, club to the right, and swing the clubs around. I've got this little half circle area that I can drop in for 1 penalty stroke. And then the 4th option, which was new for 2019, for 2 penalty strokes, is to come out of the bunker back on the line. So again, the ball and the flagstick and a line, and this would be for 2 penalty strokes. And here's a little trivia for you too. You want to win another bet? You know, we think about match play, stroke play and match play. Match play, we think about penalties as loss of hole penalties, or sometimes there's 1-stroke penalties. But this is a good example of where a player could get a 2-stroke penalty in match play. There's a little trivia. You want to win a bet, say, hey, I know a way you can get a 2-stroke penalty in match play, and it's not a loss of hole penalty. There's a 2-stroke penalty under Rule 19, ball unplayable coming out of the bunker. So that's true in match play or stroke play.
Like in a place that, like not a rake or no obstruction, but like it's just like so far up into like the side or something that you just can't even get a good shot.
Yeah, and you know, actually, in addition to this awkward rake position, that's an excellent question. Partly in 2019, this rule there was a lot of discussion about it too. And I was in on some of the discussion, which is why I know how much discussion there was, because I was quite an advocate for it, because they were looking for, again, simplification, and also this is something that could keep somebody going in stroke play. And so picture this situation, and then it really will come to light. Kind of, for example, yeah, sure.
I believe, from what I've just heard you say, that the requirement of the rake in the bunker will, under these circumstances, leave the golfer disadvantaged.
It could. You know, it can.
Particularly when the rake is on a slope. Try to play a ball that's either too close to the margin of the bunker or in some sort of precarious lie that is not stable. as opposed to leaving the rakes out, which is a club decision to make, which is not, in my view, maybe never, but certainly not as frequently as the rake in the bunker does, penalize the golfer.
Yeah, there's no question that the only way that you can get the scenario on a slope with a rake is if a rake's in a bunker. You know, and this is why it does kind of go back and forth. The sort of the counter to that is just that while rakes that are out of the bunker, balls can deflect off the rakes and go into bunkers. So, but
the ball will seek the lowest.
Right, but the only way that you can get that picture that I drew is if the rake's in the bunker. That's a true statement.
And the club doesn't have the discretion to change the rule about what happens.
Correct. That's true also.
So and there was an article in the Golf Digest in the last 6 months.
Yeah, rakes in or out.
And that person's conclusion was they should be out.
Yeah, and the tours, the USGA, PGA of America, they do all position the rakes out of the bunkers for their competitions.
Of maintenance, lower cost withdrawal, but to me, this has always been the battle between the golf superintendent and the golfers.
But there's also the view though, the rake is outside that bunker, that will block shots that should have gone into the bunker.
You've got to play off. You get a 1 or 2 stroke penalty.
Right.
If the rake is hit, you never have that situation. As I can tell, the rake is out.
But if they're out, they block that shot.
You leave the rake out.
So you see, you get. Now, I will say to your point, when at a major championship, at the start of a day, we'll position them what we call outside and away from play. So if this is the bunker and this is the hole, then the rake will probably go right there at the start of the day. So least likely to keep a ball from, as opposed to, like to your point, if the rake is positioned here, which we would never do now, it doesn't mean they don't end up there after caddies rake and toss the rakes out. But this would be the kind of positioning that we'd look for in the initial setup in the morning. But whether it can stay that way is, once you get started, is anybody's guess as to. But there you go. Or you could be like a place like Pine Valley and not have rakes. Then you've got that problem solved, but you get some pretty bad lies in the bunkers. So. Go ahead, and then we'll draw this unplayable situation.
Question about the professional game. We used to go to tournaments in the 80s and 90s. There may be a grandstand behind the 18.
Uh-huh.
With the giant screens, which are way cheaper, and all of the fancy places to sit along. The pro game you get, as long as they do the model rule, you get that temporary
movable obstructions.
Right. And when you watch, we probably don't see most of them. We only see it when it happens with a leader. It's usually speed. But you get this relief that you talk about. We're playing the same game. Things where we would have to punch out. The pros are saying, "Well, I'm going to hook it this way," and they're in a really bad spot, and then all of a sudden, a shot green, which I know they're all made pursuant to the rules, but I'm just kind of asking for your general view on that. Is that just exploded now, or is it a
Yeah, if any of you have been to a bigger event in recent years, especially a major or a Ryder Cup, the amount of infrastructure, it is really unbelievable. And one of the elements to without getting into a lot of detail, there are limits. The TIO does have to be on the player's line of play. So it's not a matter that, let's say, there's a grandstand between them and the hole, but the only shot they've got is to hit it around the trees. They're not going to get TIO relief in that case. there are situations where they're not going to get it, where the relief's going to be denied if they can't strike the ball far enough to reach it. So there are limitations, but I guess the way to look at it is that the rule's designed because 51 weeks of the year, those grandstands, portable toilets, concession stands aren't there. So players aren't going to get behind them 51 weeks of the year. And that 1 week of the year, all that infrastructure's there and players are going to get behind them. And in order to let them play, basically you'd say, well, if that grandstand wasn't there, what kind of a shot would they have? In a lot of cases, they might have an open shot. And so it's just and it's, especially in the corporate game with sponsorships and everything else, money involved, there's just going to be more and more infrastructure now and not less. TV, think about TV towers on almost every hole now. When, again, there's some of us in the room old enough to remember TV coverage of just the last couple holes of a tournament, right? Especially at the Masters, just the final few holes when we were kids. And so all of that's changed as well. But back to this unplayable ball situation in the kind of normal setting, let's just say that, again, the players played from here, and instead they hit it over here into the bush. So now the ball's unplayable in the bush. They can't play it. And they have 3 options for 1 penalty stroke. 3 options for 1 penalty stroke. For 1 penalty stroke, they can go back here to the spot of the previous stroke. And like we talked about, since 2019, now you've got this relief area, which is essentially a club length to the right and a club length to the left, and you swing it around, and you've got this little half circle that looks kind of like this. And essentially now you can drop the ball anywhere in that little half circle. So again, you're not dropping it right at the spot of the previous stroke anymore the way you used to have to. You've got a little leeway, and so you might find a lie that's a little better in that little relief area. So for 1 penalty stroke. Also, this concept of back on the line, this gets a little bit, people get confused about this. We hit the shot and it went like this, but this back on the line relief option always involves lining up the flagstick and the ball and going back. So when we say back on the line, we're referring to this and making a line in that direction back. So I know some of your friends that you play with, they want to take relief along this so-called line of flight. See, but again, you came tonight, so you're going to be able to tell them, no, there's no relief along this line of flight. The back on the line relief for 1 penalty stroke takes you back in this direction. How far? In this case, you can go as far back as you want, as long as you stay in bounds. So if you need to go back, 100 yards so that you can get it over the tree or whatever, or get a little better view, but you do have to stay on this line, and then you drop the ball on the line, and it can roll up to a club length in any direction. So you drop the ball on the line, it could roll up to a club length this way, could roll up to a club length this way, or this way, because essentially what's happening is you're establishing the relief area when you drop the ball on the line. So club length, but no more. If it rolls more than a club length, you've got to drop it a second time. But as far back as you want to go. And then the one that really players would use most often is this concept of lateral relief. The measurement takes place from the ball, which means if I'm measuring 2 club lengths laterally, this first club length might still be in the bush. But again, I've got to measure from the ball. I don't measure from the edge of the bush. So there's 1, there's 2, or I might go this way, 1, 2, and so I've either got this little relief area or this little relief area, and you can see in the case of this ball unplayable that there's part of this area I wouldn't really want to drop the ball in or play from, and it might mean that this is kind of a limited choice, and so this back on the line or stroke and distance option might realistically be all that I can all that I can do for the one penalty stroke. So always look that over carefully. But this relief doesn't come from the edge of the bush. In the case of this unplayable ball, it comes from, we start to measure from the ball and not from the edge of the bush.
You have to find the ball, or can you just all agree put in the same bush?
You have to find the ball in order to proceed under this option or this option, because you need a reference point. And if you don't find the ball, then really all you could do would be to go under stroke and distance. But finding and identifying the ball gives you the reference point. Now, by finding and identifying it, it might be way in the bush and you might not physically be able to actually grab it with your hand, but you can see into the bush enough to see the identifying mark on your ball and say, yeah, that's my ball. I can tell. I see it's a Titleist Pro V and it's got my 2 dots underneath. And that's okay because under this rule you can substitute. So let's say you want to take back on the line relief and you found and identified your ball even though you can't stick your hand in there to retrieve it. And now you could proceed under the back on the line relief because you got your reference point. You got your ball as a reference point. Okay? Yes, go ahead. Room here for a while. There are huge milestones in the rules of golf. 1744 was a milestone, the first written code. Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, which is now what we call Muirfield in Scotland. First written code. 1952, first joint code between the USGA and the R&A. For a long time in the late 19th and and right through the middle of the 20th century, there were some fairly significant differences between the rules depending on where you played in the world. In 1984, they organized the rules in a really logical fashion. A man who was president of the USGA at the time, a man named Bill Williams. Some of you may remember when he was president. William Williams, he was a lawyer in New York. In fact, I believe he's still living. I've had a chance to meet him, and really fascinating guy. And so, again, if you think about, he wanted to reorganize the rules. I'm going to get to your 2019 in a minute, but we'll get a little history. And so just think about, so this is what he did to do the 1984 reorganization. You know, we really didn't have PCs at that point, not much. So essentially what he did, he took the old rules book and he cut it in pieces, and he used glue stick and paper and Xerox copy machines, and he essentially reorganized the rules book into a really logical fashion, essentially one that was laid out kind of in the same way that you'd play the game. In other words, you learned about the fundamentals of the game, you learned about equipment, practice, where'd you start, the teeing area, and so forth. Well, in 2019, what happened was, again, really a number of people were involved, but again, USGA President Mark Newell was primarily responsible, and I was involved as a consulting member, and I read a lot of these revisions as they came through, and I couldn't believe how, because the book's got, 230 pages, I couldn't believe how frequently he worked on revisions. Well, anyway, not a single sentence in that 2019 book is the same as before 2019, and if you were involved at all with the rules before 2019, you know how hard it was to read. And now it really is written in fairly plain English and simplified, much easier to read and understand. And again, this concept that they've been working on, in addition to simplification, of penalty reductions, just like we talked about. Pre-2019, player played a stroke and it hit a tree and hit them. Well, it was 2-stroke penalty, then it was 1 stroke. Well, in 2019, that went away completely. So that thrust to simplification, penalty reduction, and that's just the kind of the continued thread involved in the discussions. But for people that have been involved, those are kind of the milestone points, and that is what made 2019, because those changes, you know, again, for those of you who really kind of pre-2019 paid attention, about 70% stayed the same, but about 30% changed, and the 30% that changed, some of it did have a pretty significant impact on how we play the game. So that's the reference. But you know what? And that's why, what I say at the beginning of the night, we're among friends here. So there's a whole range of rules knowledge in here. And so that's why I appreciate the question, because we don't know where everybody's at, but we want everybody we're trying to help everybody here, right? Go ahead.
Could you discuss the double hit?
Sure, there's another change. That's a great question. So here we go, prior to 2019, and some of you remember, again, I should say this, so, because if you remember the incident at the US Open at Oakland Hills with TC Chen, see, if you remember that, don't raise your hand, okay? So, but some of you remember that prior to that time, if you played a stroke, and then on your follow-through, your club hit the ball a second time, that was a penalty stroke, and you played the ball, you ended up playing the ball as it lies. So that was the 1984 US Open at Oakland Hills, won by Andy North, but TC Chen was right in contention, and I know some of you played at Oakland Hills. That fifth hole, that flagstick was on the right side of the green, and there's that mound over to the right of the green, and he had that real delicate chip shot, and he hit it again in the follow-through, and of course the ball didn't even end up on the green. It kind of deflected sideways, and I think he made a double bogey. But the reason I like the question is, so post-2019, what are we calling that? We're calling that an accidental deflection. You didn't mean for that to happen, right? And so that's why. And generally, when it does happen, do you come out better or worse? You usually come out worse. And then there were some of these cases, too, where some of these double hits pre-2019 were on short chips that were so imperceptible that you could only really see them on a real high-resolution slow motion, where somebody would say, well, gosh, that was a double hit, and the player didn't even realize it in some circumstances. I saw some of those videos. DP World Tour had a couple of those rulings where the player didn't even know in long grass that they actually had struck the ball twice. But there's a great simplification and penalty reduction, and like I say, all in the basket of what? Accidental deflections. You didn't mean for that to happen. You usually come out worse, and so why are we giving you a penalty? So no penalty. Yeah, that was great. That was a good question. Flip.
Another question I was going to ask them, and it happens to all of us, where you're playing a hole and you hit your drive and it's not out of bounds, there's no hazard up there, and you can't find your ball. I know the old rules are it's stroking distance, and that's where the pros, they go back to see, but isn't there a rule that you can take a penalty and you drop your ball? I'm not sure which it is. Is that?
Yeah, there is a local rule that some facilities use that essentially allows a player to drop in a fairly large relief area, but basically working their way out kind of on an arc to the fairway, but for 2 penalty strokes. And that was implemented for speed of play. Not many facilities use it primarily because it is fairly punitive, involving a 2-stroke penalty. And so still, if a player thinks their ball's lost and they played a provisional ball, generally they may still be better off with just that 1-stroke penalty. But again, that was another sort of modernization or simplification. I think it hasn't been as widely adopted as a local rule by many facilities as I think the rules writers thought it might be. But still, to answer your question, even though you think you know where it is and you don't find it, that lost ball situation, there's only one thing you can do, and that's go back to where you played the previous stroke and play again for 1 penalty stroke. Okay, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned there's 2 organizations that govern, and that amateurs and pros in the same group. I just mentioned local.
Yeah.
How is that play into all of this?
Well, facilities adopt, and again, if you're really interested, afterward, again, if you go to usga.org, I've got this big book called Official Guide to the Rules of Golf that has the rules, it has what they call clarifications, and it also has a section called Committee Procedures. And in Committee Procedures, there's a whole series of what they call model local rules. And the model local rules are designed for facilities to use for situations that involve maybe kind of exceptional circumstances where there really isn't a good or fair answer for what's happening at the facility. And so they may need to adopt a local rule. For example, I don't know, is there, at one point there was a dropping zone on 17 for the fence that was down there. Does that predate anything you're aware of? There are times when committees will establish a dropping zone, for example, in cases where players' options are more limited. Perhaps there's a boundary fence where essentially there's nowhere a player could go under the unplayable ball rule that wouldn't be closer to the hole. And so for one penalty stroke, a committee will provide a dropping zone as an additional option. Those are the kinds of things that are covered in the model local rules. The reference to grandstands, temporary movable obstructions that was made earlier, are covered in a model local rule. In other words, we don't contemplate normally a ball being interfered with by a concession stand or a portable toilet. Well, so what are we going to do for the player? Well, we'll provide this model local rule. But those are the kinds of things that are covered. For the most part, most of us are able to play by the 25 rules that are in the rules of golf. But in some cases, some of the professional organizations, for example, will adopt certain restrictions on substituting damaged clubs, for example, and things like that. And those are the kinds of things that you'll find in the model local rules. But if you really want to look at them, go to usga.org, go to committee procedures, and you can look at every one of them online, and you can see kind of the depth of coverage in terms of what's available. Relief from edging grooves around putting greens. For those of you maybe that have played in parts of the world where they have different grasses that will really encroach on putting greens, they'll have metal edging grooves, and there's a relief procedure for that. So all kinds of different things that.
The online thing show just what is available.
Yes. Yes.
It doesn't show what clubs have adopted.
No, it just shows what choices are available for clubs to make for various sort of abnormal conditions that might arise or unique circumstances that might arise for that particular facility.
And the only way that you know what that facility is adopted is to ask the facility.
Yeah, right. And a lot of times in your bigger events, you'll have a local rule sheet that you'll distribute, I assume, and that'll cover the various local rules that are in effect.
Local rules are on the scorecard, printed on the scorecard.
Are they printed on our scorecard? Yes.
So there you go. Yeah, that's a common way facilities will do it. For some of the bigger events, they'll issue a local rule sheet as well that they'll publish.
To get you out of here, like Jordan Spieth's usage of the rules in the 2017 Open was like phenomenal. Do you know of any better usage of the rules to get a better example of your personal ruling where you helped or hired a player last weekend?
So the question was related to Detroit. There was the example this weekend from he didn't win the playoff, but he on the 18th hole he got himself from interference from a sprinkler head, an immovable obstruction, so let's just talk about that for a second in terms of how that worked. If you just, what can I use for my sprinkler head? Can I use a plate? Well, there's no food on the plate. We'll use the plate without the food. So let's just say that I have, can you all see? Here's the sprinkler head. You know, some people wonder, well, if I'm playing in this direction, you know, what constitutes interference? Well, if my ball is actually on the sprinkler head, I have interference and I'm entitled to relief. If the swinging of my club would strike the sprinkler head, then I also have, I'm entitled to relief. And so basically what happened this weekend was that the player was entitled to relief from the sprinkler head. And so here I am with the club that I would play the stroke with to start. That's how we're going to determine if I have interference. And I don't have to go very far to find what we would call my nearest point of complete relief. Again, I'm going to determine this with the club I would play the stroke with if the sprinkler head wasn't here. So I don't have to get very far away from the sprinkler head, and I can't go closer to the hole where I could swing and have no interference from the sprinkler head. So this is my nearest point of complete relief. But that's the determining step. The next step that I'm going to take then, since I've determined my nearest point of complete relief, is I'm going to measure one club length within which to drop the ball. And I'm going to do that with the longest club in my bag other than a long putter. In most cases, it'll be your driver. So this is my relief area. This is this area where, in this case, one club length from the nearest point of complete relief. What happened over the weekend was that in getting, in having interference from one sprinkler head, in the relief area, there was a second sprinkler head. And so essentially the player dropped the ball in the relief area from this sprinkler head onto the second sprinkler head, and then created a situation where they had interference and got relief for a second time, and basically ended up going from the rough to the fairway. And that was okay because both the rough and the fairway are considered to be one part of the course. There's 5 parts of the course, and this part of the course that the player's in is called the general area. So there's 5 parts of the course. There's teeing areas. We know what the teeing area is. That's that tee markers that we're using and 2 club lengths behind, teeing area. The general area is by far the biggest part of the course. That's the fairway and the rough. There's bunkers. We know what bunkers are. Penalty areas. Those are red or yellow penalty areas. And the putting green of the hole that we're playing. So this player was in the general area and ended up getting from the rough to the fairway because they had interference from an immovable obstruction. Then they had interference from a second immovable obstruction. And so by the time they went through 2 relief procedures, they ended up with a ball that was in the shorter grass. And so good for them. And just, again, you know, we think of the rules sort of being mostly punitive or to our disadvantage, but occasionally when you proceed, and in this case, he actually asked the referee, hey, can I drop it on the sprinkler head? Yep. And do I get second relief? Yes. And so that's, there's an advantage of there's a case of being able to take advantage. But generally, in the case we're talking about, you have the sprinkler head interference, you find the nearest point of complete relief with the club that you would have used for that stroke. Let's say it's a 7-iron shot to the green. That's how we're going to determine our nearest point of complete relief, and then measure the club length. This determining stage becomes really important in not so much in the sprinkler head case, but more in the case of, let's say, a cart path where we have another type of immovable obstruction, and here's the path, and perhaps the ball is right here, but our stance is here on the path. And so this is where it's really important, the first step, this determining step, what I need to do, again, let's say I'm going to hit the 7-iron, and I can't go closer to the hole, but essentially what I'm going to do is stand with my feet off the path with this 7-iron, the way I would hit the shot. And when I do, my feet are going to be here, and basically imaginarily addressing the ball about there with the 7-iron. In other words, I'm not just going to measure one club length from the edge of the path. I've got to go through this determining step first, and that's what I do with the club that I would have played the stroke with. So here's my nearest point of complete relief, and now from there I get the one club length to drop the ball into. That's a step most people skip. You always want to look at those obstruction situations as two steps, determining and measuring. And most people go right to the measuring. They'll say, well, okay, I'll drop it within a club length, and they'll take their club and they'll measure a club length from the edge of the path, when really they get a little bit more than that, don't they? If they go through the steps correctly. So that's usually the step that gets skipped.
Mark, could you clarify playing ball from red and yellow?
Sure. Yeah, now I know here at Kent you only have one over there to the left of hole 2, but other places that you go, other places that you go to play, you certainly encounter more. So I don't have a yellow pen, but let's just say that this is our yellow penalty area right here. And then we're going to turn this yellow penalty area into a red penalty area here. And by the way, some of the words that went away in 2019 were hazard. There's no more hazards. There's bunkers, and there are penalty areas, and there are red and yellow penalty areas. And the penalty areas are just called that. They're called by their color distinctions, red or yellow penalty areas. And a lot of the language that was adopted in 2019 was designed to be easier to translate, especially for the R&A. So we have a lot of these concepts of areas. I mentioned the general area, teeing areas. We don't have a teeing ground anymore. We have a teeing area, penalty areas, and so forth. So let's take the player who plays from here, and their ball goes into the yellow penalty area. So now there are two options for the yellow penalty area. The player can go back here and play at the spot of the previous stroke for one penalty stroke. Or, remember we talked about this back on the line relief? Well, now the line is going to be formed by where the ball crossed the edge of the yellow penalty area and the flag stick. And this is going to take you pretty similarly to here, kind of back this way, back on the line. Those two options when it's yellow. Then when it's red, you get an extra option. When it's red, you get the same stroke and distance option for one penalty stroke. You get the same back on the line, but notice here that's not necessarily very practical. And so the option that you get when it's red that most people use is what they call lateral relief for one penalty stroke. So again, you take your driver and you'd measure two club lengths. There's 1, 2, and then you'd have this little shaded area right there. For one penalty stroke, you drop in that little shaded area taking lateral relief. But that lateral relief is not available when the penalty area is marked yellow. When it's marked yellow, you only have the back on the line relief or the stroke and distance relief. So, and a lot of people will get that wrong, especially where in a yellow penalty area, the ball might go over the penalty area and then spin or roll back in. So it last crossed the edge of the penalty area right here. Well, again, stroke and distance takes you here. Back on the line takes you here, but you are not able to drop in this 2 club length lateral relief. That's not permitted for a yellow penalty area, even though now you went on to say the green side of the yellow penalty area. That's not an option that you have. You only have that when it's marked red. Okay, so that's good. We've covered unplayable balls, lost or out of bounds. We talked about stroke and distance. Red or yellow penalty areas. We've covered those. So that you've got the 3 penalty rules really in the book. Penalty areas lost and out of bounds, and unplayable balls. If you install the rules app, you'll find it's rules 17, 18, and 19. They're all right in a bunch. The three rules with penalty relief for one stroke.
What's the most recent new rule?
Again, it would be some of the changes that would have taken place in 2023. For example, and again, these are kind of subtle. If you substitute a ball when the rules don't permit, so for example, on the putting green, some people have a special ball they like to putt with. Well, they're not supposed to do that. Prior to 2023, if you put down a putting ball and putted with it, you get a 2-stroke penalty. You see, the kinder, gentler rules in 2023 give you a 1-stroke penalty for substituting when you're not entitled to. So again, some of those things, there wasn't anything that was really dramatic in terms of changes. And we're on this cycle where, and we've kind of been on it for the history of the rules, 4 years was kind of the rules change cycle. A long time ago, they coincided with presidential election years. So 2016 was the last rules revision year before the big one in 2019. Now, they did do one in 2023, so they stayed on the 4 years. Whether we're going to get one in 27 or 28, I think is a little bit up in the air at this point, partly because of that question that Ryan asked to begin with about this ball, the changes with respect to conforming golf balls, so we'll see what happens. All right, anything else? What do you think? Oh, thank you. Well, thanks so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And like I say, I saw a lot of friends that I haven't seen for a while, so that was good. And happy to do this, and hope you all have a great golf season and that the weather cooperates quickly and that we're all out on the golf course soon. Okay? All right, we good? All right, thanks, everybody.